Well, half a day, everybody. We're glad to be meeting again after a few weeks off, so I hope it's been good to be back together with your community group. We're going to be starting a new series of teaching here tonight, this week, and it's going to be going on over the next 8 weeks, all on this same topic. It's very different than what we did before. If you remember, beginning last fall all the way until just recently, we were on the series of one another's. But what we're going to go into now is different, and it's on purpose. We want our community group studies to be both practical, and that was really the whole emphasis of that first session. How do we interact together? How do we grow as followers and disciplers of Jesus? But we also want it to be a teaching time where we're building on foundations of knowing and understanding the Scriptures. And so we've been talking through, as pastors, what that looks like. And so that's brought us to a sort of a change in direction for the next 8 weeks of just really doing some teaching. The other thing that's different is that I'm going to be doing this series. So for the next 8 weeks, you're going to get a chance to just see me. When we decided what this was going to be, our next track, the other pastors nominated me to teach. So that's why I'm going to be doing these next weeks, and I hope that you won't get tired of this. I hope it'll be interesting. You won't get tired of my face, but we'll learn as we walk through something. When I was in elementary school, I've told you before that my family moved from Colorado, where I was born, to California, to Northern California. My dad was pastoring a church in inner city San Francisco, and so we moved to San Francisco. Our family actually lived in the city there for a while, and then we bought a house and then another house out in Pacifica. I know some of you are familiar with the Bay Area in California. So Pacifica is not far out of, really right down Daly City and the northern part of San Francisco, but only 15 minutes out, but it's right on the coast. Very pretty location, right on the beach. In fact, we had a couple of houses that weren't on the beach, but just a mile off, and our route to and from, was by that beach. And that was my first introduction to the ocean and to beaches, and I've loved the ocean, and I've loved beaches ever since. I don't know if you have ever been a sandcastle builder. I've got a picture of a sandcastle for you. I don't know if anybody has ever built a sandcastle like that one. Actually, the ones that I've helped with have more looked like this one, and that's a little bit more my style. But if you've ever been on the beach, as you guys have, and if you have ever been building a sandcastle, one of the things that and one of the things I learned as a young elementary school kid was that you could put all kinds of time and effort into building a sandcastle. You could spend hours and hours and hours on it, and it would be amazing when you're completed. But if you came back the next day, depending on where it was, it would most likely be gone. Or at least it would be just a rundown shambles of, whatever you left the day before. Well, what happened? You put all that time and that effort into it. Well, what happened was that, sandcastles built in the sand are not very stable. The tides come. In fact, if you build it where the waves are going to come in and the tides rise and fall, for sure, when you come back the next day, you might, depending on how big your castle was, you might see a little bit of a mound there, but for the most part, it's going to be gone. You have no trace of what was actually there to begin with. Over the next 8 weeks, the next 8 sessions, I want to use that analogy as a metaphor for the religious world and the religious climate that we live in, the church climate. And actually, it's not new. See if this makes sense to you. I used to do a seminar years ago that I called, I've done it actually a number of different times, but I called it foundations, pillars of truth in shifting theological sand. I was just thinking about it earlier, and it sounds very seminary-esque, doesn't it? And that's probably why it sounds like that. I did this seminar quite a few times right after I got out of seminary, early on in my ministry. It's probably why it sounded, like that. But the idea is that, let me tell you the title again, Pillars of Truth in Shifting Theological Sand. And the idea is that what people think about the Bible and about theology is constantly moving. If you've done any study of churches or any study of church history, church movements and Christian history, you will know that theological movements and religious climates are constantly changing, and that's been true, down through the centuries. Which is interesting for us because what the Bible says is that Hebrews 13 verse 8 says, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Malachi chapter 3 and verse 6 says, for I, the Lord, do not change. Psalm 102 verses 25 through 27 say, of old hast thou laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of thy hands. They shall perish, but thou shalt endure. Yea, all of them shall wax old like a garment. As a vesture shalt thou change them, and they shall be changed, but thou, God, art the same, and thy years shall have no end. Everything else in our world changes. Our world itself will fade away, but God never changes. So the question that comes up then, why does our religious climate change so much? And really the analogy or the metaphor that I want to bring us back to is, how can we as Christians be unchanging like God is in the things that truly matter when we live in a world, and even particularly in a Christian world or a Christian climate where things are constantly changing? How can we be more like God in the fact that we are stable and sure as He is? So the idea of all of this is that if you're going to build your house on the sand, right? So pillars of truth in shifting theological sand. If you're going to build your house, your life, or the church, we're going to talk about that in some ways, on the sand, and that's what we have to do in this setting. We have shifting theological sand. If you're going to do that, then you better go down deep with the foundations. You better go down deep with the pillars. You got to go down to the bedrock. So the pillars that whatever you're building your house on, if you're going to build in the sand, those pillars better go down till they hit bedrock, because then and only then will your house remain firm and not really fall over with the shifting tides. So, you got to have pillars down deep. And that's one of the things that we love about Harvest. I mean, truthfully, for 47 years now, Harvest Baptist Church and Harvest Ministries, by God's grace, has maintained a mooring or a foundation, I think, that's solid and unchanging. Now, it doesn't mean that the ministry doesn't change. Of course, it does, and there are a lot of things that change over time in different ways in different places. But the core values and the doctrine and the foundations, those are things that by God's grace we can look back. In fact, we can go back to people who have been here kind of throughout the years, some that have led in this ministry, and they're able to say, yeah, not everything looks exactly the same as it did, but that core foundation, that core value, it's not moved. And the truth is that that's rare. It's rare in Christian circles. Unfortunately, it's rare in a lot of places churches that 47 years ago started and were founded on certain principles now today are very different from, where they began. And so we really believe in that. We like that idea. And we want to talk about what is it then that goes down to the bedrock and what does that look like? So, what are the pillars? Okay? So what are the things that we would say at Harvest are like the things that go down deep and they go down and stay there? First of all, let me tell you, they're mostly unseen. The foundation of a house or the foundation of a building is not the first thing that you see when you walk into the house. But it's really important. And if it's not firm, that foundation isn't firm and sure, then the rest of it doesn't really matter. But when you walk in the house, you see all kinds of other things. And I think that's true of a church. It's true of a ministry. The foundation isn't necessarily the first thing that you see. It's not the thing that, is the most prominent when somebody walks into the building. There's other things that maybe are part of it. But that foundation is super important. And in fact, if you're looking for a house, it's really good to check the foundation. If you want to buy, then you want to find out, is the foundation sure? In fact, that's, ministry-wise, that's why we have a class called what? Foundations. I mean, that's what our kind of intro to Harvest class, that's the title of it. It's called Foundations. Because we really do want people to know that before they join together, they should check the foundations, because this is what's going to, it's going to keep it standing in storms and in shifting sand. There's a man in our church, I won't give his name because I haven't asked him about this. I don't think he would care if I did. But a while back, he was making some decisions. God had brought him to himself. He was wanting to get baptized and looking at church membership. And we met and we talked about church membership. And we weren't going to have a foundations class for a little while out. And he was ready to move forward. And I was anxious, to help him move forward. And so I said to him, I've said this before. I said, you know what? I think it's okay. His kind of his understanding of the church and his understanding of the next step of baptism. I said, why don't we just go ahead and you can be baptized. We'll have you join the church. And the next time Foundations class comes along, you can go ahead and plug into it. And I thought that was just, a really good solution. And I loved it. The young believer looked at me and he said, well, no, I don't want to do that. I've got questions. I want to know why. I want to know clearly what the church believes and why it might be different from another place. And I was so challenged by that. I was convicted by that, frankly. The foundations are really important. And so we want to know what they are, and we want to be clear that we maintain them, because if you don't maintain the foundation, then eventually we have trouble with that too. In fact, that was kind of the next thing I want to say. They do have to be maintained. If the foundations aren't maintained, they erode over time. Okay, so for us, what are those pillars? What is that foundation that goes down? And, well, it's a number of different things, but primarily it's our doctrinal statement, who we are, what we believe about the Scriptures and how it impacts us. It's our core values. But one of the pillars for us is that we are a Baptist church. I mean, it's right in our name, and it has been since the beginning. Now, for 47 years, it's been Harvest Baptist Church. And it's an important pillar for us. I want to tell you why and why it's significant. I want to talk about what that means over the course of the next 7 weeks now, this week and the next 8 weeks. I want to talk about what it means. Why is it Harvest Baptist Church? Why is that important? In fact, why is it important enough that we would put it right in our name? And we keep it there for 47 years. We haven't changed it. It hasn't gone out. It hasn't been something different. So there are 8 distinctives. We're going to call them Baptist distinctives that define why we would call ourselves, why this would be called Harvest Baptist Church. And what I'd like to do over the course of these weeks is just kind of walk through them with you. Practically, biblically, I'd like to ask some questions. I'd like to have you ask some questions, and then I'd like to give us some opportunities to talk about them together in our groups. Before we get there, let me give you some explanations. I got 4 things. This is all kind of going to be introduction for us before we dive into these 8 things over the course of the next weeks. But here's some explanations, some clarifications. I think it'll be helpful for us as we launch this. Number 1, the fact that we are a Baptist church is the result of our Bible doctrine and practice study. It is not the origin of our doctrine and practice. Okay, I was trying to say that simpler than that. That's the best I could come up with. Track with me just for a minute. Okay, the fact that we're a Baptist church is the result of our study of Bible and doctrine. It's not the origin of our doctrine and practice. So what that means is that we don't believe certain things because we're a Baptist church. This is Harvest Baptist Church. Therefore, these are the things that we believe because we're a Baptist church. It's not like that. We believe certain things because we've studied together the Scriptures and we believe the Bible teaches these things. 1, 2, we're going to talk about 8 of them. There's more than that, but there's 8 specific things. And these 8 things together are what Baptists have historically believed. And so we look at the Bible and we say, what does the Bible say about these questions that we have about life and about how we should practice as a church? Here's the things that we believe the Bible says. And those things are in line with what those who have identified themselves as Baptists also believe. Does that make sense? It's really important. And I don't want to go over it without telling you it's so significant. Some people say, I am a fill in the blank, so this is what I believe. In fact, I've heard this a lot of times. I am a Lutheran, so this is what I believe. I am a Catholic, so this is what I believe. I am whatever it is, okay? I am this, so because I'm this, these are the things that I believe. We are the exact opposite of that. Really, and it's very important. Fundamentally, we believe the Bible. Here's what we believe it says. And as we have identified these things, then we said we see that other Baptists down through the centuries have believed the same. And so we can identify with these 8 things. That's number 1. Number 2, most of us, harvesters, don't come from Baptist backgrounds. In fact, I think that we should do a survey sometime. I'd be really interested in that. I'd actually love to know that. But most of us don't come from, like some Baptist backgrounds. Whereas a lot of people, they would say, I'm such and such because my family is. My family's always been. It's been, a long time. That's why I'm such a thing. At Harvest, actually, it would be more rare that would be the case. Maybe we can do that in community groups afterwards. I'll see if we do that. I'd love to get a little survey of, what is our background. A lot of people at Harvest are first-generation Christians. And so, coming to Harvest would be different from maybe where they come from before. A high percentage of Harvest people would say if they grew up in church, they grew up in something other than Baptist. And I want to say that because maybe as I'm talking about this, we're talking about, hey, this Harvest Baptist Church, here's the distinctives of Baptist. You might be saying, man, I didn't grow up like that. That's not in my background. I've been part of other churches. I've come to Harvest because of some things, but I don't even necessarily know about this Baptist thing. First of all, I just want to tell you, that's not unusual. You're not unusual. You're like everybody. I mean, virtually everybody that's here. We just came from other backgrounds. We're all very similar in that way. And that's going to be important for us as we talk through this. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3, the term Baptist church is not found or identified in the New Testament. The New Testament talks about terms, identifications of people that are following Jesus as Christians or as people of the way or as brethren or as saints. There's different terms, but never Baptists. And again, I think that's important that we recognize our allegiance is not to any identification, certainly not to some Baptist identification. Our allegiance is to the Bible. And again, it's an important distinction. But at the same time, I do want to tell you that I believe that the Bible position is the same position as, what we could define as Baptist. So I'm not uncomfortable with the term. I think it actually can be helpful for us to identify kind of here's the things. And I'd also tell you that there's other groups that wouldn't call themselves Baptists that would believe the same series of things about what the Bible says. And we'll talk about that as well. So, you know what? Actually, for time's sake, I'm going to come back to this. I do want to ask this question. I'll get this at the beginning of next time, all right? So if a Baptist identification is not found in the New Testament, well, where did Baptists come from? For instance, I had a Catholic guy tell me one time, he said, the Catholic Church dates back to the 1st century, but Baptists didn't come on the scene until recent centuries. So wouldn't it make sense that, our church has been around, we can trace it back, to Peter in that 1st century. You guys have only been around a little way. Wouldn't it make sense that ours might be more faithful? So I'd like to answer that question. Where did Baptists come from? And have they been around? And what does all that mean? Okay, so let me come back to that for time at the beginning of next time. So the last one is this, sort of clarifications. We are not stuck on the term Baptist, but we are stuck on the ideas and doctrines that the term represents. And I hope that you sense that as we're talking through this. So this isn't some, it's not like, this is like this big Baptist deal for us. But what the thing that this term represents, the 8 things that we're going to talk about, we do think they are really important Bible principles, and they're pillars for us. Right? Does that make sense? They're pillars for us that go down deep, and what we hope that it does is it helps us to stay firm in shifting theological sand. If we're not willing to identify who we are, whether we say we're Baptist or not, but who we are, these are the doctrinal positions. These are the things that are critically important to us. These are the things from the Scripture that should never change. If we're not willing to identify those things, then when the theological sands of the climate shift, that's when churches shift along with it. So our burden is that we put these roots, these foundations down deep. And they'd help us to understand, well, why is it important? What's distinct about us than maybe somebody else? So that's the idea. Let me give you one last thing. This is actually a quote. Let me read it to you, but it's going to show up with a bunch of questions that we're going to answer over the course of the next weeks. So these Baptist distinctives relate to questions of vital interest today. For example, does absolute truth exist, or are all belief systems relative? One of the distinctives of Baptists is we believe something about this question. Who controls the programs, the property, the finances, the staffing, and the doctrinal position of a local church? Who's in charge of that? Is that like a big hierarchy of a church somewhere? Who's responsible to determine, what the decisions about a church are? Who controls all that? Does God dispense His grace through religious rituals? Should a free society legislate righteousness? Is it right to judge anything about another person? Is there a biblical model for church leadership? What should church leadership look like? And what is the proper relationship between church and state? Okay, 8 questions. All of them are the critical questions that we're going to ask that actually these distinctives identify for us. And I'm looking forward to it. I hope that you don't see it as some, kind of boring teaching. I don't want it to be that. But it's important for us because, you guys, these are pillars. These things go down deep. I'm praying that the stewardship that we have together, you and I as members and as part of the Harvest body, in order that Harvest would be a church that would maintain its direction, would maintain its foundations for years to come, 47 years from now, we would hope these foundations would remain the same, even though the theological tides of time are going to continue to shift. If that's going to be the case, it's going to only be because our foundations are built down deep in the bedrock. So let's talk about what some of those pillars are. Thank you guys for hanging in here with us. We're looking forward to the next 8 weeks together.